Hello, we welcome you all to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts, myself, Bernhard Günther, and my wife, Laura Matsu. And the title of this episode is How Your Inner Work Fuels a Collective Awakening. And the inspiration for this podcast is based on a common misconception we've heard, throughout the years. And that is that engaging in inner work is just hiding out in a cave or at home and avoiding the world. I've seen many people equating inner work with non-action and not standing up against evil, claiming that, quote, meditating on peace won't resolve anything, and that inner work is just a passive state, and if we don't do something, evil and the darkness will succeed. Some people even claim that inner self-work is narcissistic and selfish because it distracts us from helping others in need. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. I've also seen that these ideas mostly come from people who are actually not engaged in any inner work or maybe don't understand what it entails, and as a result, they don't see how sincere inner work would not only benefit their immediate life, relationships, health, vocation, even finances, but even more so the collective humanity and the world at large. Virtually all spiritual teachings throughout the ages have emphasized the importance of inner realization via inner work, not only for personal liberation, but for helping raise the consciousness of the collective and for all of humanity. Be it the great avatars of the past like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna, or more recent teachers like Sri Aurobindo, Rudolf Steiner, Yogananda, Krishnamurti, Adyashanti, and Carl Jung, and many others who repeatedly emphasized that the solution to all the suffering and the world's problems is within via inner transformation, to find the kingdom within first, which is our true self and divine essence. However, most of us or most of humanity don't listen, and we keep externalizing everything as we live under the illusion that the external world is separate from us. And so most of us and humanity are distracted by the shadows on the wall, like in Plato's allegory of the cave. Or we fight illusory windmills like Don Quixote, that's the main character in Miguel de Cervantes' novel Don Quixote, who mistakenly believes windmills are giant enemies and he charges at them with his lance, signifying a futile fight against an imaginary illusory threat. Now, these windmills symbolize the content of our fragmented unconscious and shadow projected externally. In other words, we tend to fight our own inner division projected on the world stage. Now, obviously, this is pure madness and insanity, yet this state of being or state of consciousness in our world is normalized, and we justify it simply as human nature. And like in a Stockholm syndrome, people are caught up in the drama triangle of victim, persecutor, and rescuer, with any person taking on any of these three roles throughout their lives in a closed loop. Hence, overall, nothing really changes on a significant level. It just rearranges in different appearances. But as Adyashanti said, and I'm quoting him here, our greatest contribution to humanity is our awakening. It is to literally leave the state of consciousness that the mass of humanity is in and discover the truth of our being. Sometimes through trying the help on the exterior level, we can miss the greatest help we can offer, that is our own awakening. This doesn't mean that we avoid doing what we can do on an exterior level, lending help, feeding the hungry, caring for the poor and the sick. This doesn't mean any of that is to be avoided or not useful. But ultimately, what we come to realize is that our greatest contribution is to heal the illusory divisions within ourselves. That's the ultimate gift we can give to humanity. That's what's going to change humanity. Humanity is not going to change because we figure out a different system of government. It won't change because of something that is imposed from the outside, because of noble ideas or grand systems. True transformation always comes from the inside. It comes from awakening. And as Krishnamurti also said, if you as a human being transform yourself, you affect the consciousness of the rest of the world. So, with that being said, in this episode, we want to explore the essential foundation of what inner work truly entails, using both psychological and spiritual work. how facing your shadow, wounding, healing your trauma, your inner child, and inner division will positively affect not only the world, but also your personal life. We will discuss how individuation affects the world and how this process helps you to align with your specific purpose and myth that is unique to you, which in return also affects the world positively by being your true self. We will go over the different levels of consciousness and how they affect the world and why people on higher integrated levels of consciousness have way more power and positive effect in the world than people on lower states of consciousness who are mostly stuck in negativity and blame victim consciousness. We will also look into the traps of inner work related to spiritual bypassing and why no steps can be skipped, as well as the many misconceptions about inner work and how to avoid the common pitfalls. In the second hour of our podcast, there's always a second hour for our members, we will also discuss what keeps most people from engaging in deeper inner work and why some people are simply not ready for it in accordance with their soul journey and karmic lessons, and how the inner work also leads you to finding your bliss in life and personal myth. We'll also clarify the much discussed issue of being black-pilled, what it is and what it is not, and how your level of consciousness directly relates to how you see the world and how it affects your life. Furthermore, we will also give you concrete and practical suggestions which you can apply in your life right away to help you in this process. The second hour, as always, is available for members, and you can sign up on my website, veilofreality.com/membership, if you're not a member already. And also, we would really appreciate if you could leave a review on Apple Podcast for our podcast, the Cosmic Matrix Podcast. You can find it there. It really helps with the algorithm and turn more people on to this podcast. All right. So with that being said, let's jump right into it and address the first question. What do we really mean by inner work?
I mean, I think inner work is being turned inwards into your inner world, your subpersonalities, your parts, your feelings, your body. It requires observing your thoughts, awareness of what's going on within you. Eventually, you learn to not identify with those thoughts and the different parts within you, which we often mistake for the true self. It involves allowing yourself to feel things. It involves being just aware of your inner world in general, I would say, and that has great depth to it. Your inner world is literally a world of itself that is full of both angels and divine parts, and for some, demons, which are basically traumas, which are beginning to hurt you. And so to me, it's just being turned inwards into your own inner worlds. Whereas we live in a world where we're primarily externalizing things, where it's about this person needs to be doing this, or this is what I need to do, or this is what I need to be externally. It's moving to a place of tuning into your own being rather than externalizing what you should be doing.
Yeah, that would also add, the question is also how to do inner work. That's the big question. And I would argue that it does require a certain level of intellectual understanding of psycho-spiritual concepts and practices without obviously falling into the trap of only intellectualizing it and just getting stuck in the head. There needs to be the somatic and emotional process, which is key. But as you mentioned, what kind of inner work are we talking about? Mostly definitely shadow work, Jungian shadow work, inner child healing, which is huge, healing the mother and father, wound and complex, anima-animus integration, kind of the alchemical marriage of the inner male and female, obviously healing trauma, working with these different subpersonalities, freeing stuck and suppressed emotions, especially emotions we don't like to feel, but we have buried deep in the shadow, like guilt, shame, anger, grief, sadness. And obviously it's necessary to get into your body for that, because a lot of stuff we carry or unprocessed stuff is stuck in the body that tends to manifest also as tension or even illness. But ultimately, this inner process is about leading us to find our true self and healing that which really keeps us from living a false self, which we mistake for the true self.
Yeah, that's a really underlying thing as well, because I've noticed that even I saw something the other day where being authentic is like the best marketing strategy or something. Like someone was just literally saying that being authentic was the best marketing strategy. And they have a point where I think we're moving into this era where conformity and going along with the program and thinking what everyone else thinks, we've seen how in the past 4 years that can actually be very dangerous. And there's a move to authenticity. But authenticity in my view is actually acting from the true self. And it's actually quite rare because you can be authentic in the sense that being open, or being honest with how you feel, but you can be completely identified with a false self. So I see a lot of people who talk about authenticity and being my true self, but they're not actually being their true selves. They're just saying whatever they think in their mind or whatever. They're just blurting. They have no censor, basically. But the theory of the true self and a false self was first presented by a childhood psychiatrist named Donald Winnicott. And he spoke about how people in childhood tend to develop a false self to protect their own inner life, their own more vulnerable true self. And the true self refers to a sense of self that's based on authentic experience, a feeling of being truly present and alive. And the false self is a mask born out of defense. And that's the key thing. It's born out of defense. But behind that mask of a person, they feel empty. So the false self are behaviors that are learned through social conditioning. They're learned through having to get along in a world where you're maybe being projected on by your parents on who you should be rather than who you really are, rather than being spontaneous and genuine. So, and we develop this false self as children when we're very young, when we're not loved for who we really are. So when the parent projects their own unmet needs onto us, we begin to develop a false self to meet those needs. Or maybe the parent projects an image onto us, who they want us to be, which is not in alignment with who we really are. So we develop a false self very young as a coping mechanism to get our needs met in relation to the demands of the environment. So other people's expectations for us, especially our parents, make us develop an inauthentic mask that we carry long into adulthood. But through inner work, the whole goal, in my opinion, is to uncover the parts of yourself that you have disowned. Look at the defenses that you've built up, because the first thing you're going to meet when you want to find your true self is a defensive walls you've built around it. In IFS and internal family systems, they would call these protectors. And begin to, number one, explore those defensive. And then most importantly, what's behind those defensive? What are the disowned feelings that we have about ourselves? That's how we bring the true self forward. So most inner work is just uncovering the layers of protection around the true self so we could get beyond those defenses and we can really access who we really are at the core. And for most of us, we have developed some degree of a false self in relationship to this environment.
I like the analogy that the true self is like the sun that's always shining. It's always there.
Yeah.
But it's covered up by the clouds, by the fog, by the mist, right? And all of that, which our defense mechanisms, our conditioning, our wounding, our traumas, shadow aspects, all of that. And it's not about working on the clouds and whatnot. It's just by removing all of that, which is in the way of the sun of our true self. It's not about adding something. I think a lot of pop self-help teachings are geared towards working on the false self, trying to perfect the false self, and instead of engaging in the process of subtraction, of removing that's in the way what's already there and natural to us.
And I think, unfortunately, for people who more gear themselves towards spirituality without psychology, what ends up happening is they construct an ideal image of what a spiritual person looks like, and they develop a new subpersonality, a new false self, a new spiritual persona, and neglect all of the trauma and all of the conditioning and all of the wounds that's driving them to create this perfected persona. So they construct another false self, and I see this a lot, actually, and this can go really far down the rabbit hole to the point where you're not even identifying as like a human anymore.
Yeah,
like,
it could be easily, I'm a starseed now from the planet Arcturian.
Exactly. And I think that, but basically to me, that's the marker of like how well I'm doing psychologically or spiritually. I remember the first time that I felt that I was really getting somewhere in my own healing process. And I was living on this island in Canada on the West Coast, and I was just riding my bike around, and I was just singing some songs I was listening to at the top of my lungs. And I realized that I felt like I did when I was a child, when I was spontaneous and free. And that's when I started to realize, like, wow, the person who I've been for the past decades is actually a facade. And this part of myself that feels like a child, spontaneous and free, that's who I really am. And it still took me some time to really live as that. But you start to get glimpses, I think, of this spontaneous, free, of feeling just truly yourself again as you start your own inner work. And I think this is the ultimate goal, is to be in a place where you're just comfortable being this true self, regardless of external conditions.
Yes. Well, let's look into some of the common misconceptions we've heard about inner work and also shadow work and all that. Here's one claim that inner work is non-action and an escape from life. Well, if you're really sincere in the inner work, as I can speak from my own personal experience, it actually inspires you and would say, quote unquote, forces you to engage more fully in life, because you start taking full self-responsibility for your thoughts, for your actions, for your feelings, without blaming somebody else for it. That's the key point. You kind of get out of victim blame into more understanding that you are responsible for your inner life, and it translates automatically to take responsibility for your outer life. So you're more engaged in life without excuses, without distractions, without avoidance.
Yeah, and you just feel more fully alive. Like the true self is naturally creative. It's engaged in life. It sees life as an adventure. It's excited. It has passions, right? A lot of the non-action and escape from life to me is, number one, like almost this futility, like what's the point? What's the use? It never, in this very kind of depressive mindset. And I think that we actually tend to escape from life the more that we're living as a dissociated false self, because we're terrified of what would happen if we actually move towards the things that really excite us.
Yeah, that's true. And once you're more connected to your true self, your essence, through the inner work, it truly inspires you. You see life as an opportunity, as a bigger process, and not just this negativity of doom and gloom and, oh my God, suffering. And we'll talk about this later, how these different levels of consciousness, based on how much you are already connected to your true selves, directly affect your perception of life. There's another misconception, and that is inner work is self-indulging and selfish, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it could be to a degree, but if you really do it correctly and without spiritual bypassing, it does open up higher levels of love, compassion, empathy for others, because again, these are attributes of your true self.
Yes.
So you naturally want to be more of service, not out of an ego perspective of virtue signaling, but truly coming from your true self, because you realize the interrelationship from all. You see yourself in others and vice versa.
And it's very interesting that people say that, because the thing is like you have an inner world, you have your own thoughts, feelings, subpersonalities, dreams, whatever, right? And turning towards that part of yourself to be seen as self-indulgence and selfish is a very interesting mindset, because in my view, just engaging and making money and buying cars and like just wanting to build up thing, like to me, like that's a very self-indulgent view of the world. But that's what we view in this society as a marker of success. Someone who truly knows themselves and is truly connected to their true self, that's not very commonly seen as a marker of success. So I'm saying that a lot of these ideas and rebuttals to inner work actually have to do with the mindset of materialism, not materialism as in consumerism, and that's related, but being identified with solely the material world and neglecting the world of soul and spirit and your own psyche.
Yes. Next one. inner work doesn't help with defeating evil and darkness in the world. I've heard this a lot.
Yes.
Right? Especially on social media when I talk about inner work and all of that.
Yeah.
But how are we going to defeat the evildoers and all of that? Well, it's false because, and we'll talk about this later throughout this podcast, your state of being, which means your level of consciousness, has direct effect on the collective and what you perceive as the external world. Because the more you make the darkness conscious within you and integrate your shadow, especially shadow work, the more you help diminish the darkness and evil in the world. It goes back into Carl Jung's work. And there's a quote by Carl Jung. I'm kind of paraphrasing it from one of his students. He asked Carl Jung, how can we avoid a major cataclysm and all the destruction and suffering in the world or diminish it? And Carl Jung simply answered, if enough people would engage in the inner work to come into tune with their soul being, their true self.
And then there's another great quote. This is by Irene Claremont de Castillo, where she says, an integrated individual is one who carries his own dark shadow of undesirable qualities, frees those around him from his projections, key part, and by doing so actually transforms a fraction of the evil of the world. So until we make the evil within ourselves conscious, we will tend to project the evil that's actually within our own psyche onto people around us. Yeah. And this will be immediate people, this will be on institutions, this will be on the whole world. And I think this is the main thing that you start to realize when you start to engage in shadow work, that a lot of your ideas of who is evil out there is often actually projection of something going on within you. And I think that's a really hard pill for people who are not interested in shadow work to swallow. And you can actually tell, because I know whenever I point at this out, or even I share this quote that I just shared on social media, people get very triggered. And they're like, well, what about Fauci? What about this guy? What about Klaus Schwab? You know? The fact of the matter is, I hate to say it, is like, you don't actually know these people. Like, they represent an archetype of evil within you. Yes. But how do you know? Like, you're also projecting qualities onto people that you've never met, you've never actually experienced.
Well, that ties into this the second, exactly, directly into the next misconception. I heard this a lot when people say, well, not everything we see in the world is a projection of our shadow.
Yeah.
And I have to say, anybody who says this has no true understanding of what actually shadow work is. It's a misconception of shadow work itself, and also a misconception of the concept of projection.
Yeah.
Right? But ultimately relates to the divine law and truth that as within, so without, that we live under this illusion that the external world and other people are separate from us. That's what the ego feeds off of, the sense of separation, right?
Well, Jung would actually argue that until you really know your own inner world and your own shadow, you'll never know which is a projection of your own shadow and which is a reality. And, you know, while Jung also argued that archetypal evil is not something you should integrate, a lot of the other projections are actually your burden to carry and to explore. And I think very few people, and maybe even very few people, are ready to do that, because it is a harrowing process that will tend to bring up uncomfortable feelings that most people don't like to feel.
All right. Then another one, people often say, are we just supposed to do only shadow work, surrender to the divine, and be passive? Well, if you do shadow work correctly, certainly not a passive state, but nor surrender to the divine. And the idea of surrender from a spiritual perspective to the divine is a very active state. You have to engage the will, give your will to the divine, because he uses you as a transducer to do his work. So it is a very activating, active state. The idea that it is a passive state comes from the ego that believes surrender to be a sign of defeat.
And shadow work also taps you into a wellspring of vitality and creativity, which is the opposite of passiveness. In fact, going along with the program of your false self and all of your conditioning and living life in the unconscious way that you have been doing is the passive state.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Okay, let's go now over some points how your inner work also obviously affects your personal life positively. Number one, it will better your relationship to yourself first and foremost, which is very important. Help you get over the unconscious I'm not good enough program, which many of us have, and also unconscious guilt and shame. And as a result, bettering your relationship to yourself, bringing forth the true self, it betters the relationship to others, right? Being more present with others, being able to engage in intimate, fulfilling relationships, friendships, and all of that. You will also have, as you just mentioned, more access to creativity, inspiration to create the life your soul truly desires, to engage more in life. You will experience more true joy and positive emotions that are embodied as an expression of your true self, and they're not just fleeting moments. You will realize that life is not happening to you, but for you. And all there is are lessons from the higher perspective, right? In the context of the evolution of consciousness. And you feel actually more empowered. You identified less with your thoughts and feelings, even less with your body, but with the eternal consciousness that is who you truly are, right? Which helps you to get over fear as well, which is a very big aspect what people's lives drive. And ultimately also negativity of others or in the world will affect you less and less, your inner state of being, because you find the source of life within yourself, the holy grail, the treasure, right, as depicted in many, many myths, so to speak, your true soul being.
Yeah, so you feel more connected to your true self. Therefore, you have deeper, more authentic relationship to others. And being more connected to your true self helps you become the person that you're meant to be, rather than the person that society has conditioned you into being for approval, or rather than acting out from your wounded self. So there's fulfillment on multiple levels. And I would say that this inner work is really just showing you that path forward.
So now let's look into how your inner work affects the world positively and fuels a collective awakening, right? The topic of this podcast is very important. Well, it ties into the divine law, as within, so without. So the more you have inner stillness, peace, inner equanimity, more connected to your true self, it counterbalances and actually counteracts all the negativity and chaos in the world. Now, what do we mean by negativity? That's stuck in shame, guilt, despair, apathy, anger, hate, regret, resentment, grief, fear, anxiety, blame, jealousy, envy, self-pity, self-hatred or self-importance, pride, condemnation of self and others. We all have these, right? It's not about now being ashamed of these emotions, but you will be less stuck in them or less project them externally, which then by extension will help the world.
In my opinion, that's just like the Twitter timeline in a nutshell.
Exactly. Right. Negativity is ultimately a state of being stuck in victim consciousness, where you actually give power away to external circumstances, to the external world, and make your happiness and joy dependent on external circumstances.
Yes, which is a really disempowering position to be in, where your internal happiness is dependent on many factors in the world changing, much of it beyond your control.
Yeah. And we want to bring in some of David Hawkins' work again and his map of consciousness. We have talked about this before, especially in the recent podcast called How to Raise Your Levels of Consciousness. If you haven't checked it out yet, highly recommend to listen to it to give you more context to that. But he really proved through his scientific approach to this map of consciousness, which he calibrated over many decades. He even said that positive states of consciousness will counterbalance the negativity and chaos in the world. And his key point is that the level of falsehood or life-denying energy is below 200 based on Hawkins' map of consciousness, calibrated below 200, all the negativity.
Which is guilt, shame, hatred, pride, exactly. And 200 begins with courage.
Exactly, correct. And actually about 80% of humanity exist on a base level below the level of 200. They are stuck in these constant negative states of consciousness, right? It also sees God as despising, vindictive, condemning, vengeful, and so forth. And also atheism is below 200. But calibrating above 200, which is only about 20% of humanity, that starts with courage and facing the truth, right? Literally counterbalance the negativity of the rest of the 80% of humanity.
And here's a quote by David Hawkins explaining what you just said. And he says, and I quote, "It's because this energy of peace is transmitted outward into the world that mankind is still alive. It would have destroyed itself a long time ago without the energy to counterbalance it. That's why our own inner evolution serves all of mankind. By reaching these higher states of lovingness and peace within ourselves, we become a saving presence in the world. The power of love emanated by the consciousness of only a fraction of mankind actually totally counterbalances the negativity of the whole mass of humanity. 78% of the world's population is still in the negative range, below the calibrated level of 200. Only 4% ever even reaches a level of love, which calibrates at 500, and only 0.4% reaches unconditional love, which calibrates at 540. We change the world, but not by what we say or do, but as a consequence of what we have become. Thus, every spiritual aspirant serves the world. And I think you can even just see this example in your own life when you find like a truly loving, calm person who has a very well-regulated nervous system as a result, who's very connected with their true self. Notice how people gravitate towards them, regardless of what they do, regardless of what they say. There's just an energy emanating from them, which attracts people and also heals people around them. So, and you can see this work in little ways too.
I want to mention that this is very important because David Hawkins mentioned it as well. You move away from just being concerned what you have or what you do, but to who you are.
Yes, exactly. And then he kind of goes into the different levels and how much they counterbalance. And he says one individual at level 300, which is known as willingness, I can do this, optimism, very inspired. They counterbalance 90,000 individuals below 200. And willingness, I see this often in the world, actually, of people who are like really helpful, ready to do it. Yes, I can. Let's make this happen kind of people. They're not, they're uncommon in like the grand scheme of things, but they're also common as you see them everywhere. Like you see them out in the world doing quote unquote regular jobs who are just really helpful and really, enjoy what they're doing. One individual at level 400, which is associated with reason and understanding and the higher intellect, counterbalances 400,000 individuals below 200. One individual at 500, which is a level of love, and then unconditional love being at 540, counterbalances 750,000 individuals below 200. And then again, only 4% of humanity is above 500. One individual at level 600, which is where now you're getting into like true states of enlightenment. This is associated with peace, bliss, counterbalances 10 million individuals below 200. And when he calculated this, only 6 sages on the planet calibrated 600. So if you think you're at 600, you're probably not. One individual at level 700, which is enlightenment, counterbalances 70 million individuals below 200. And one single avatar at the consciousness level of 1,000, which is basically Jesus, Buddha, etc., totally counterbalances the collective negativity of all mankind. So like essentially if we had like another Jesus or Buddha incarnate on this planet right now, it would counterbalance everything.
I think that's why they incarnated as a necessity to bring the counterbalance throughout the ages.
And keep in mind, both Buddha and Jesus incarnated at a time when the collective consciousness of humanity was extremely low. Wasn't even Buddha like the level of consciousness like 50 or 100 or something,
it was below 100 back then.
Yeah, below 100. So imagine the dark times that these 1,000 level avatars incarnated into and like how powerful that was.
It's also to point out, it's a logarithmic scale, the map of consciousness. So it increases exponentially. The higher levels are harder to achieve. But again, for a more in-depth understanding how David Hawkins came about the map of consciousness and calibrations, I recommend to listen to our podcast, How to Raise Your Levels of Consciousness, where we go deeper into his work as well.
And you see this in a small way. Like, for example, like even in our own personal life, like if I'm in a bad mood or you're in a bad mood, it can affect each other and vice versa, right? If I'm in a good mood, if I'm feeling really inspired, even if you're in a funk, like you naturally will be affected by that energy field. And I think this is the most important thing is like, you have to be aware of your own inner life and the impact it has on other people to see this effect that goes on.
But best example, when I'm in a shitty mood, or maybe I trigger you, you trigger me, we get in an argument, we have this going on, we're below 200, some slipping down there, blame a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, Leo, our dog, comes here with his 500 wagging the tail wagging. David Hawkins calibrated a 500, a level of love. He told us, it's fine, guys. Let's just get along. We forgive each other. And he lightens the mood right away.
And I think it's important to look at this in context of like, because the thing is like, I've noticed it's not that you're just going to be feeling a single emotion all the time. Yeah. This is the main misconception with this work, is that you actually often, especially in intimate relationships, there's a clearing out of the material in the lower unconscious that goes on constantly, which feels like a descent. So like, you know, you realize that there's a major, or you have a flashback to a major wound in childhood that's connected to the reason why you feel shame all the time, right? It's not about just like, oh, I just need to feel love and vibrate at 500. No, you need to descend into the feelings.
That's a key point.
You need to allow yourself to fully experience those feelings, which clears them out of the lower unconscious, of the unconscious of the body. And then you can more effortlessly be at a higher state of consciousness. So it's not this mental, spiritual bypass thing. You have to allow yourself to be with acceptance with what you're actually feeling, rather than trying to force a feeling upon yourself.
Exactly. Here's almost the paradox in this equation, which David Hawkins also pointed out. You don't raise your vibration or frequency or access higher states of consciousness by just trying to think positive or suppressing any negativity, which is all ultimately spiritual bypassing. You actually raise your frequency and enter higher states of consciousness by removing, healing, integrating, and transmuting what is in the way, like we said before, by allowing yourself to feel it, right? All these things you have suppressed. By going through the descent, you ascend. That's really what it comes down to. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how these negative states of consciousness below 200, according to the map of consciousness, contribute to the negativity actually and the evil in the world, making it grow stronger. Well, number one, the avoidance of unconscious and repressed pain, wounds, and trauma creates more conflict between people because we project our unconscious pain and suffering onto others and the world. That's the common, psychological rule, so to speak.
Yeah, and it keeps us trapped in repeated cycles of unnecessary suffering. So we keep blaming the outside world for what is an internal problem, and we keep meeting in the outside world a reflection of the internal problem. And in trying to just obsessively change the outside world, we miss the real source of where it's coming from.
And also very important, especially for truth seekers, activists, and all of that, if we don't really engage in both inner psychological and spiritual work, our well-meaning efforts to actually fight the matrix, injustices, atrocities, and any activism or attempt to eradicate quote-unquote evil will be reactionary and driven by our unconscious impulses, our own wounding, and essentially also hijacked by unseen physical forces that feed off of all the projections and negativity. It's what Gurdjieff called the trap of the revolutionary mind.
Yeah, and it also has to do with the experience of our own parents too, and how we meet our parents in
the mother-father wound, right?
We meet our mother and father in institutions and things and causes that we see in the world, and then we're trying to repair a childhood wound by like fixing some injustice in the world.
So really to bring it down to, and that's the key point for shadow work, because these unconscious shadowy parts, which we're not aware of ourselves, are our blind spots, and they fuel the collective shadow in the world and keep it unconscious, right? The unhealed trauma that we all carry to varying degrees, and which are also used by occult entities to tag into.
And can I just say something to this? For example, the shadow I think that we're seeing in the world, especially the past 4 years, is the shadow of totalitarianism. And how you see it so obvious, like, the right thinks the left is being totalitarian, the left thinks the right is being totalitarian. But I would actually argue that we all have our own inner totalitarian of like, you need to be like this. Yes. You need to think like me. This is exactly the way it is, right? Yeah. And this not only beats us up internally through an own inner voice, but it's the way that we treat others as well. You should be like this. It has to be like this. You don't think like me, then you're evil. Like we all have this inner totalitarian totalitarian that's showing up in all sorts of ways. And if we each integrated our own little piece of that, it would decrease the totalitarianism we see in the world, because it's all happening via individuals.
Well, I like to always say you need to face the tyrant and deep state within yourself.
Yeah.
First and foremost. And understanding of the spiritual reality, spiritual forces. Sri Aurobindo, Ralph Steiner talked about entities, beings, negative, occult, hostile forces who manipulate us like literally puppets on strings by fueling then our reactive behaviors, because they feed off of this negativity, which we project externally. And feeding the emotional luge, right? When we project negative emotions externally, and most often results in action under the illusion of free will, but it's very much manipulated from higher realms. And ultimately, the goal of the inner work and raising the level of consciousness within yourself and the world is then acting from your true self and not the wounded and conditioned ego personality most of us we tend to identify with, right? And also not getting caught in self-pity or self-importance, and especially not getting caught in the matrix blame victim trap. Okay, and as you mentioned, how you truly raise your frequency and the high levels of consciousness, not forcefully trying to put yourself out there. That's the whole realm of spiritual bypassing, but it's a process of emptying, letting go and surrender, not adding, right?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
So this involves, I work with a psychosynthesis model of understanding the psyche, which acknowledges that you have different layers of the unconscious. And in psychosynthesis model, those would be working with the lower unconscious. So the past, childhood, wounds, traumas, unprocessed emotions, anything that you took on from childhood that made you develop a false self and made you follow certain urges, grieves, deaths that you haven't grieved, anything that's left in the unconscious that you suppressed in order to survive, that needs to be brought forward. And in my opinion, just on essence, I noticed that anything that connects you with your feelings, it helps you cry, even if it's from something that happened decades ago, especially if it's something that happens from decades ago, is an important moment. So when you feel these moments come up where you get emotional, you want to cry, the most important thing for you to do is just to give yourself space to allow that to happen. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we defend ourselves right away. We're like, oh no, I'm not going to cry. We stop ourselves, right? That's a defense mechanism that comes in immediately. But if you can just, when you feel that pain, when you feel that guilt, when you feel that shame, when you want to cry, let yourself do that. And you're clearing out all that's in the way of you embodying a higher level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Which, again, implies allowing yourself to feel those negative feelings. That's how you transmute them, actually.
Yes.
And raise higher levels of consciousness. And David Hawkins also emphasized it in his work. It's actually an archetypal truth in any psychospiritual process, right? That's the key point, because no steps can be eventually skipped.
And this implies, too, awareness centered on the body. So, and I think this is the primary issue of like why inner work isn't an actual process for most people, is because our awareness is centered in the head, in the thoughts, identified with the thoughts, is centered out there, something you read on the internet, something we're listening to, so you're placing your awareness in the body where the feelings and sensations are. You're not placing it externally. And that, generally speaking, the more that you can practice doing that, ideally having a practice where you just sit and do that. Like everyone asks me how to meditate all the time. All you have to do is just sit, breathe into what you're feeling, allow yourself to feel it with full acceptance, and breathe out, let it go. And just do that for 5 minutes. And I promise you, your life will change slowly over time if you do that consistently. So it is, to raise your level of consciousness, it implies awareness centered in the body, allowing yourself to feel all feelings.
Exactly. And now here's another big thing which counteracts the whole idea that inner work or self-work is selfish and narcissistic. No, if you truly do this process, right, the descent into your being, processing all your stuff, removing the clouds to let the sun, your true self, shine, you raise your level of consciousness, right, your level of being. Hence, you become more sensitive to the energies of the collective, to the suffering of the collective. You actually feel the world more. You're less identified with your personality structure, right? You're not identified with your limited sense of self anymore, but you're connecting more to all that is. And by extension, you help transmute the suffering of other people through your inner work, because you are more connected to all of this. You realize in an experiential level that all is one, that we're all connected, that nothing is separated, and hence you literally help to, again, alleviate the suffering of the collective.
Yeah, a simple way that you can see that is that, if someone's really angry at you, or so say you go to the grocery store and like someone is just really rude and a jerk to you, right? Well, an unconscious person would just be rude to them back, be like, fuck you, A more conscious person would be able to just walk away from the experience, feel the pain of what it feels like to have someone just random get angry at you and transmit their suffering on you. Feel into the suffering that you carry now, that you feel in their body. Instead of projecting it back on them, you just breathe into it and let it go. And you can actually transmute a lot of energy around you by just being present with what you're feeling, because sometimes what you're feeling is not even your own feelings. It's something you've picked up from the world too.
And
so you're not, when you sit down and do this practice of just allowing yourself to fully experience all feelings, you're not just feeling your own feelings, you're feeling experiences, things other people have said to you, you're feeling all sorts of things.
Exactly. I mean, that's also very true, that when you're around a person who truly embodies his higher levels of consciousness, you're just around his or her aura, like by proximity, you will feel that sense of positivity naturally.
Yes.
As opposed to somebody who's in doom and gloom, below 200 in negativity, it feels icky. You don't actually want to be around this person.
Yes, yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. But ultimately, it's easier said than done, because the inner work, by the fact what it entails, is far more challenging than the ego's or our false personality temptation to externalize everything. And this battle is exemplified in many esoteric metaphors and spiritual scriptures throughout the ages. So again, integrated holistic inner work is not about escaping life, but fully facing and engaging in it without blame or complaint. See everything as an opportunity. All this a lesson. What lesson? You move away from I can't to I will, and find ways to work with it with full self-responsibility. You also don't turn a blind eye to darkness and ignorance. You use it as a way of transforming yourself and, by extension, the world. One sign of progress is the inner realization, actually an experience that you are, again, connected to all that is, that everything in the world out there is within you, and you don't see yourself as separate anymore. That's the ultimate experience when you reach higher levels of consciousness. And hence, the more you come into harmony with yourself, the more you make the darkness conscious within you, transmuting the material that is keeping you stuck in these lower states of consciousness, the more you raise your consciousness and being, and by extension, you help the collective awakening and alleviate the collective suffering of humanity. That's really what the whole mechanism is about. And as a result of your expanded vastness, your acts actually have way more power as you have become more aligned with divine will, expressing itself uniquely through you. And this is how you truly help to transform the world and even transmute evil itself, because even evil has its own teaching function in the context of the evolution of consciousness.
And then I would just, as a practice, notice when you do practices, when you do your shadow work, when you do inner work, when you heal and grieve something major from your childhood, notice how you feel inside, and then notice how you feel inside impacts your relationships around you, from the most intimate relationships to the people that you meet in everyday life. And once you start to notice that impact, you see that your inner work is actually not just for you. It has a ripple effect on your entire environment. And I'm not even just talking about the people, even the energy of your space, the energy of your room, the energy of your house, the energy that you bring to work. It all has a ripple effect, and it affects your life in ways that maybe we don't notice, but are happening all the time.
Yes, very well said. So that is the end of the first hour. We always have a second hour for members. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up at my website, veilofreality.com/membership. And in the second hour, we go a bit deeper into this concept of being black-pilled. We have talked about this before, but it has become more popular with its many misconceptions. So we want to point out what it is and what it is not, right? It relates to levels of consciousness. We also talk about how your level of consciousness directly relates to how you see the world and how it affects your life, the perception of the world. We'll address what keeps most people from engaging actually in deeper inner work, and why some people are maybe not ready for this more transpersonal psycho-spiritual work in accordance with the soul nature and karmic lessons. And also we'll talk about the importance of finding your personal myth and follow your bliss in all of that to help not only yourself to come into higher alignment, but to help the world with your soul purpose. And with that being said, we'll be right back.